At 9:36 p.m., on October 27, 2011, a green LED on a basement badge reader blinked like an eyelid in the dark. Upstairs, room 214 exhaled and went still. The person who flipped that switch, Hannah Cole, English teacher, never made it to her car. 14 years later, her former students came back with jokes and cheap nostalgia and left with a truth a building could no longer hold. They went beneath the school, beyond the boilers, to where air tastes like wet paper and old pennies. There, behind a pegboard panel with two mismatched screws, they found a rubber-banded manila folder. The tab was written in that tidy school district hand that makes everything look ordinary. Cole Hannah, internal. Not memorial. Not staff. Internal. The kind of file that lives where stories are kept from light. This film begins at the last place she was registered by a machine, and the first place she was remembered by paper. She was 33 with a voice built for library corners and snow day announcements. She didn't measure a student by grades so much as by margins. Purple ink curling around the edges, you found the symbol before you had the word. Keep going. She ran a shoebox full of index cards labeled tone, motif, thesis like emergency flares for kids who couldn't find their own sentences yet. If the bell rang and a head stayed bowed, she stayed too. A building like this after dark will choose a new owner. The hum of fluorescence, the cough of HVAC, the wheels of a floor machine. Hannah tried to keep ownership where she thought it belonged. With students, even when they were gone. Weeks before she disappeared, she wrote things that institutions say they want but often fear. Requests, not rumors. Reposition cameras to cover East Wing stairwell landing. Audit master key copies. Log nightly sign-outs. Post after-hours work orders for contractors with names and times. She believed, with the stubborn faith of people who fix things by documenting them, that correct forms could repair broken doors. And that light, properly placed, is a kind of guard. At 5:10 p.m., she emailed her department chair, staying for study hall. 214 if anyone needs makeup time. At 7:42 p.m., a cafeteria camera caught a half frame. Her shoulder, her thermos, steamed like a thought that hadn't decided to be said. At 9:21 p.m., a motion sensor in the English corridor flicked awake, blinked once, went back to dreaming. At 9:36 p.m., the badge reader at the basement stairwell registered a ping. The new cameras did not. The upgrade had left that landing blind. Morning opened like nothing had been broken. The substitute mispronounced 3 names in third period. The bell stuttered once at the half minute the way it always did when the clock didn't like the rain. In the staff lot, Hannah's sedan beaded under a sodium lamp. Her purse, habitually locked in the trunk ever since last year's break-in, was there. Her laptop, where drafts and grievances lived, was not. A district liaison did what district liaisons do. Reached for the sentence institutions keep for days like this. No indication of foul play. It's a phrase that opens doors you don't want to walk through. The first 72 hours were an engine spinning on wet pavement. Patrol cars mapped circles that water erased. Culverts, storm drains, a vacant lot behind a shuttered check cashing place where kids sometimes dared each other to run through. A boyfriend was run, clean. Colleagues were interviewed, collegial. One custodian avoided eye contact. Later that would matter. A legacy DVR, a pre-upgrade box of old camera guts sitting in a rack like a relic nobody had time to inventory, wasn't seized. The on-site tech shrugged. The district contact said it was out of service. Evidence is a matter of belief sometimes, and no one believed in that box enough to pick it up. In absence, rumor does slick work. It found a shape in a custodian with a temper, in a colleague who didn't appreciate being corrected in a meeting, in the outline of a relationship that didn't survive the light. None of it was proof. All of it was noise. But the silence had a scene, a thing that talked even when everyone else chose not to. Budgets are shameless narrators. They tell you what the people in rooms above them do not want to say. A line item appeared with the regular pulse of a worry. Emergency night work. Roof patch. Duct inspection. Fire door alignment. Nothing dramatic, everything plausible. The invoices were signed by an assistant principal in a hurried hand, the way you sign when you think your job is to keep wheels moving. The vendor, Northline Services LLC. The remit address, not an office park, but a self-storage facility on the edge of town where corrugated doors hold other people's secrets. Hannah had circled these numbers in her notes, not to accuse but to verify. She believed that if the work were real it could withstand the light. And if it wasn't, light would withstand her. Time, which favors the people who can wait, went to work on the case. Leaves fell, seniors graduated, a new superintendent introduced a tagline about excellence. The East Wing landing remained unobserved by cameras and, therefore, by anyone who only believes what a lens provides. 14 years later, people who had once drawn hearts in yearbook margins came back with careers and baby pictures and the kind of laugh you only make when you see someone you knew before you knew yourself. They traded updates like baseball cards on the auditorium steps and then did what old students always do. They went looking for the rooms that had made them. 214 was still 214. The paper star was gone. Someone had painted over that little rectangle above the whiteboard only to have it reappear like an old photograph. A former librarian, Mrs. Ellison, arrived with a tote full of memories and the kind of smile that ends in a wince. If you're still looking for Hannah, they were always. You won't find her in the halls. You'll find her where the district put the things it didn't want to look at. Archive Room B. Downstairs, past the boilers that breathed like the belly of a beast, the cinderblock room took shape in flashlight cones. Shelves bowed like tired spines, bankers' boxes slumped at the corners, silverfish skittering into exclamation points that weren't meant for them. At the back, a pegboard panel sat where a wall should have been, 2 screws that didn't match, 1 strip of dust that looked interrupted. It's strange how the body knows a lie before the mind organizes it. They pulled. The panel gave with a polite little gasp. Behind it lay one thing that makes the most sense of all sense in an institution. A folder. The rubber band split like a quiet firecracker. The tab named someone the building had tried to forget. Cole Hannah, internal. Inside. Grievances that had been misplaced. Photocopies of night invoices labeled emergency and stamped paid. A note in Hannah's tidy hand, not written to future headlines but to future checkers. If anything happens to me, start here. Sometimes the difference between rumor and truth is a rubber band. They didn't keep it. They didn't wave it around in a parking lot for selfies. They brought it to the one kind of person who knows what paper really does. A detective who listens first and labels later. A forensic accountant looked at Northline Services the way a botanist looks at a plant. Not for its surface leaves but for its stem and root. The remit address ran to a unit number at the storage lot. The signatory who'd pushed those night invoices through, assistant principal then facilities director, was the same person who'd championed a camera upgrade that, curiously, let the East Wing lose a pair of eyes. A judge read what the accountant wrote and signed what the detective needed. The corrugated door of Unit H17 rolled up with the metallic cough of a thing that hasn't been asked to speak in a while. Inside. Boxes of maintenance gear. Shrink-wrapped blank keycards. And a dust-gray box, taped, labeled in marker, DVR 2009. It is astonishing how many cases depend on a machine no one put on a checklist. The data was old, the way rain is old, damaged around the edges but still unmistakably itself. On the night Hannah disappeared, the landing's camera, before the upgrade, saw enough. At 9:24 p.m., a figure in a dark jacket with a lanyard and a badge, a contractor, came down the stairwell, paused, looked up, and turned toward the maintenance corridor. At 9:36 p.m., a second silhouette, the right height, the right gait, the right tote, took the top step. People who loved her felt the air change inside their lungs. 2 shapes. One place no one was supposed to be seen. The frame went soft with motion, then both figures slipped out of view toward the corridor a camera never watched. Asked again, the contractor admitted to crossing paths with Hannah. He called it a misunderstanding about access. He said he was there on emergency night work even though the work order for that night existed as much as the old camera on the landing, only in someone else's memory. The custodian, now retired, said he had been told to run the floor machine in the east wing on certain nights to cover noise. He thought it was roof repair. He remembered master keys that had a way of being in the wrong drawer when the sheet said otherwise. Back where the building keeps its most stubborn smells, a pair of cadaver dogs went quiet by a floor drain. Cleaning solvent, pulled from the concrete pours, matched bulk purchases that fall. Hammers do honest work, so do chemicals when you ask them the right questions. A rural property, leased once by a company tied to Northline, gave up what the city could not. Partial remains and personal items that belonged to a woman the building kept calling teacher even after the sub had taken attendance. DNA doesn't consult rumors. It consults truth. A district statement is a magic trick performed in daylight. It must say something and admit nothing. Process failures, miscommunication between departments, personal reasons, no evidence of intentional obstruction. Each sentence wore its suit well. The assistant principal, now facilities director, resigned at a convenient time. The family settled, not because money translates love but because grief sometimes needs a door that shuts and a room that holds it without a microphone. What remains are questions that wear work boots. Why this landing? Why this night? Why these invoices? Why keys that travel from sign-out sheets to pockets that don't belong to them? The basement file answers with an economy Hannah would have appreciated. Because money is best stolen quietly. Because access is best granted in places no one can see. Because keys look like trust until they look like permission. Hannah had a habit of turning lights on. She thought light protects. Often it does. Sometimes it draws insects. Sometimes it draws men who want to pretend darkness is broken only by their orders to fix it. Let's be precise about motive because precision is the only way to beat the vague. This is not about an affair. Not jealousy. Not the narrative that crowds love because it's easy to whisper and hard to prove. This is about money that looked like maintenance, about authority that dressed as routine, about keys whose ring follows the wrong footsteps downstairs that cameras no longer watch. Consider the line item itself. Emergency night work. It's bureaucratically genius. Emergency creates urgency. Night moves the work where eyes aren't. Work gives it the halo of necessity. You can feed a whole scheme through 3 words that polite people stop questioning after the second. Hannah did not accuse. She documented. That's worse for thieves because accusations are loud and easy to swat at. Documentation is quiet and lethal. It survives rain, resignations, and rebrands. It fits in a folder behind a pegboard and waits 14 years like it's not waiting at all. After recovery comes the ritual of pretending to forget. New banners flare over front walks. Websites change fonts. A memorial garden figures out how to bloom without making anyone uncomfortable. Fresh paint. Fresh slogans. Same stairwell. The East Wing landing, once a blind spot, becomes a cautionary tale in a committee no parent attends. Reforms arrive not as apology but as policy. The only language institutions respect enough to change their own behavior. Legacy device protocol. No box with cables avoided or tossed. Camera coverage audit. Nothing labeled upgrade unless it means more eyes, not fewer. Key control. Sign-out sheets that match electronic logs that match actual keys. After-hours work orders. Posted publicly by 4 p.m. Any day work will happen past 8 p.m. Nothing here costs much. Everything here would have cost nothing in 2011. At the graveside, words felt redundant, and yet words are the only thing her family had left to give. They didn't choose the statuesque phrase. They chose one suitable for a teacher who loved commas and believed semicolons were hugs for struggling ideas. We waited. We found you. We remember. The contractor faces what the state can name: murder, evidence tampering, fraud. The resigned administrator faces what morality can name: dereliction, self-preservation, the kind of leadership that lets cameras look away. The people who sign checks face small boxes of text that add up to larger boxes of problems. And the students, the ones who pulled the pegboard, face a lifetime of being told their reunion story beats anyone's. They didn't want a story. They wanted a teacher back. Here's the part that won't leave me, and I hope it won't leave you. Hannah's words weren't pleas. They were instructions. reposition camera, audit keys, post orders. She built, in forms and emails, the very path investigators used 14 years later to find what rumor never could. She left a map, not of where she went, but of why she vanished. And when her students walked into the basement, they didn't discover a smoking gun. They discovered the box of matches the arsonist thought no one would check. What could have saved her? Maybe nothing. Maybe a single camera that never went blind. Maybe a single administrator who said, if she wants light, give her light. Maybe a contractor who remembered he was hired to fix doors, not create new ones for secrets to walk through. Maybe a culture where emergency night work doesn't skate past auditors' eyes like a kid at last bell. What will save the next Hannah is not a documentary. It's you, who runs keys, who approves invoices, who asks why an upgrade means less coverage in the place even a student noticed was dark. We're not done. We've opened the file. We've recovered the video. We've listened to the drain. Next, we'll walk the maintenance corridor step by step with the exact timing of the motion pings. We'll sit down with the retired custodian who explains the orders he got and the nights that didn't feel like nights. We'll show how shell companies dress in respectable names and how a storage unit rent receipt writes a confession with numbers. We'll trace one signature across 5 years of emergency work, and we'll ask why keycards beeped on nights no one was in the building, except the building always knows. If you've ever worked in a place with after-hours access, with remit addresses that point to corrugated doors, with keys that wander farther than sheets say they should, stay. Not because this story is grim, but because it is useful. Hannah's file didn't travel 14 years to be a horror story. It came back to teach. At 9:24 p.m., the English wing was a throat clearing. A figure in a dark jacket with a contractor badge stepped onto the basement landing, looked up as if to greet a camera that, by then, no longer watched, and turned toward the maintenance corridor. 9 minutes later, Hannah Cole would leave room 214 for the last time and follow the same path. Between those two movements sat a machine no one hears until they're told to, a floor scrubber humming like a big apology. The corridor itself was nothing. A narrow artery cut into cinder block, fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead, a spill kit, a mop sink, a floor drain that swallowed more than water. On maps it looked like an afterthought, a service passage to nowhere. But service passages are the places where work happens without witnesses. The recovered DVR, the one left behind in a storage unit like a lie you think you can afford, gave us fragments. They are enough. 9:24 and 18 seconds p.m. The contractor descends from the east wing stairs. He moves like he expects to be there. That's what a badge buys you, posture. He carries a messenger bag too neat for tools. He doesn't look at the door to the mechanical room. He looks at the maintenance corridor the way a person does when they're measuring what sound can hide and what silence will betray. 9:27 and 6 seconds p.m. The floor machine starts. It isn't in the frame, but sound prints the way shadows do. In the hallway above, a custodian engages the scrubber, the vibratory thrum setting a kind of white noise curtain. Noise can conceal, but it also marks time. The machine will take roughly 15 minutes to run the English hall, long enough to cover a conversation no one wanted overheard. 9:31 and 22 seconds p.m. Motion in the stairwell above, brief, unfocused, like a presence remembering it's late. The DVR sensor records it as unknown movement. The camera no longer watches the landing, but the sensor still thinks it should. A ghost of a system doing half its job. 9:36 and 2 seconds p.m. A second silhouette, lighter frame, toed against hip. Hannah. The step on the top stair is familiar enough that your throat tightens without evidence. In the surviving frames, the contractor doesn't return to the landing. He waits where the camera cannot see. And now the beat everyone argues about. 9:36 and 24 seconds p.m. An arm arcs into partial view, not the contractor's dominant hand if you believe the personnel file later recovered. A raised gesture that looks like stop if you're generous and like threat if you've ever flinched. The silhouettes compress, two shapes occupying one decision. Then they move out of frame toward the maintenance corridor, into the world where audio dies and only invention lives. The floor machine thunders on upstairs. Somewhere in the cafeteria, a cooler kicks, then stills. 9:41 p.m. The scrubber powers down. Silence doesn't prove anything. It just lets you hear what you've already decided to believe. We can't tell you which words were used. We can tell you why words would have been used at all. Hannah had filed requests about after-hours access, keys, work orders, camera coverage. The contractor had access that night that didn't match a posted order. The corridor is where someone would attempt to make a stickler into a secret. The line between those ideas is thinner than people like to admit. Later, in a soft chair in a room with too much afternoon light, the retired custodian would explain it like this. You run the scrubber when they tell you. Sometimes you do the math on what's getting cleaned and it doesn't add up, but math wasn't the job. I was told, run east wing, start at 9:25. Let it run, don't pause. I figured roof stuff. Or glue. They said glue needs noise. You're gonna ask who said it? I'm gonna tell you it came down from the ones with clipboards. I don't keep names for orders, I keep hours. He looks down when he says it. Men who work nights learn to live with the fact that their names end up in stories for the way they listened, not the way they spoke. A floor machine is honest, just loud. You can hide a lot under loud. Voices get undecided, footsteps get corrected. You don't hear small things. I remember the smell down there sometimes. Citrus. Not the janitor stuff. Something sharper. The kind that makes your throat think twice. Cleaning solvent, the high-powered kind, has a way of introducing itself. Later, trace sampling at the maintenance bay drain would match residue to the shipment lot the district signed for in late October. Noise doesn't erase the past. It frames it. Key control, where trust becomes permission. Keys ruled the basement. Keycards were for teachers, visitors, contractors. Keys, the old brass kind, were for people who knew how to be in the building without anyone thinking to ask. The East Wing's master cylinder set had one rule. The master can open all, submasters open some. Masters were supposed to be locked in a box behind a window where a secretary sat until 4. After 4, keys should have been signed out and signed back in, logged by hand, then cross-checked by the electronic access logs at week's end. In Hannah's grievance, she wrote, Master key copies unaccounted for, request audit of brass plus card access, discrepancies between sign-out sheet and electronic time stamps. When investigators finally pulled the electronic logs, not just the card pings but the closer data for mechanical doors, they found a pattern. After-hours entries to mechanical spaces that shouldn't record entries at all unless a person physically turned metal. That meant either the lock cylinders were repinned to match a submaster improperly, or someone carried a master they shouldn't have. The assistant principal, the one who'd initialed so many night invoices, told internal reviewers his key was in the lockbox from close of business to open of business, Monday to Friday. The paper agreed. The metal did not. A forensic locksmith can tell when a cylinder has been visited by a stranger. Scratches make their own minutes. What you see here are microscrape patterns inconsistent with routine wear. This tells me there were trial insertions, the kind you get when someone's testing which master they've got on a ring that doesn't belong to them. Keys form a chain. Break one link, the chain looks intact from across the room. Up close, 2 rings grind. Hannah's request for a master key audit, weeks before she vanished, reads like a safety briefing drafted by the one person who could still imagine a building telling the truth. The assistant principal's pen, budgets, line items, signature drift. Signatures are bodies. They age. They get sloppy when the hand is tired or the mind distracted by the fact that paper is both protection and exposure. The assistant principal signed dozens of emergency night work invoices across 3 fiscal years. Early on, the loops were careful, the descenders long. By the last set, the ones issuing just before and after Hannah's disappearance, the signature tilts and tightens. Graphologists find meaning in that. We won't pretend we know. What we do know is the frequency changes, more emergency, less daylight work, and the remit address shifts exactly once. From a post office box to Unit H17, the storage facility. Why would a school district send money to a storage unit? They didn't, not directly. The checks went to a P.O. box. But past due notices returned from the storage company to Northline Services show the same unit, H17, in arrears the same month the invoices spike. Receipts from a money order kiosk 3 blocks from the district office fill the gap. A shell doesn't need a desk if it's got a box and a lock. We aren't talking millions. We're talking a few thousand at a time. You call it routine long enough and routine turns into ritual. You build a private income stream just off the edge of oversight. Then someone wants work orders posted. That's the thing empires, big or small, can't tolerate. Process. The audit trail points to a small secret fattened by politeness. Politeness lets people sign things they're asked to sign because asking feels like accountability. It isn't. It's choreography. When the corrugated door rolled up, the air lifted old dust like it had a schedule. The box labeled DVR 2009 sat on a shelf at the back, the way people hide the thing they want found but fear finding. Why keep an out-of-service recorder? Because trash can be evidence. Because you keep what you might need if someone someday asks the wrong question with the right warrant. Because a unit full of secondhand tools looks like a tool chest until the wrong box is opened and the right one answers. The data on the DVR was degraded, humidity, temperature, neglect. But digital forensics is a patient craft. There were frames enough to sequence the 924 and 936 entries, to reconstruct the posture of a man with a badge and the arrival of a woman with a tote. The library was gone, but the card catalog still had labels. The unit also contained shrink-wrapped blank keycards, not illegal to buy, not uncommon for vendors to store, but unlogged in district inventory. Their serial ranges overlapped with cards activated the week after the camera upgrade. That doesn't prove intent. It does prove access in search of narrative. When you upgrade, you decommission legacy devices. There's a chain for that. Tag, bag, log, scrap. If something isn't tagged, it's because someone decided it wasn't anyone's job. Or because it was someone's secret. Secrets are just stories with bad bookkeeping. The students who found the folder don't talk about heroism. They talk about habit. We weren't trying to be detectives. We were trying to stop being people who said, "Remember Miss Cole?" as a way to apologize. I looked at the invoices and thought, too many emergencies cluster at fiscal year end. That's not broken roofs. That's broken ethics. You remember where the living books are. You remember where the dead ones get shelved. Nobody wants to go to Archive Room B. That's why the truth lives there. Their voices give the folder something paper can't. Heat. For 14 years the case lived at room temperature. The pegboard panel let air in. Air makes fire think about being fire again. Do not add words where evidence doesn't. What we know, the contractor and Hannah entered the same unwatched corridor at the same minute. What we infer, they disagreed. About access. About orders. About keys that open spaces people weren't supposed to be in without a posted work order and a chaperone. Hannah had a habit, asked to see the paper. The contractor had a defense, say the paper exists elsewhere. Elsewhere is where truth goes to flirt with error. Elsewhere is also where cameras didn't look. In her handwritten note in the basement file, Hannah had written, "If anything happens to me, start here." People read that sentence as prophecy. It isn't. It's procedure. She wasn't predicting a crime. She was predicting an audit. She always said if we ever got lost in a lab, follow the procedure. That's what this was. She was building one in case someone else had to finish it. Finishing it meant following the money to a storage unit, following the unit to a DVR, following the DVR to a frame, following the frame to a drain. The path isn't romantic. It's administrative. That's why it works. Concrete remembers with pores. Liquids leave families, and chemistry is a language with a longer half-life than rumor. Swabs taken from the maintenance bay drain returned a profile of industrial solvent purchased in bulk by the district the same week Hannah disappeared. The brand wasn't unique. The timing was. Dogs don't care about brands. They care about loss. Both cadaver dogs alerted within a 3-foot radius of the drain. Not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. A direction beyond a reasonable doubt. They sat. Then they leaned in. You get to know your partner, the way they inhale when the air isn't empty anymore. People were told, afterward, that the floor drain was cleaned thoroughly after a minor spill. Probably was. Some things clean to the eye and stay in the mat. The storage unit tied to a manager who tied to a shell that tied to a lease on a rural property where noise goes to die. There, in the far corner of a place whose grass hadn't learned the names of the men who walked it, searchers found partial remains and personal effects consistent with the teacher who once wrote in the margins more than she wrote on grades. DNA answered with the same unsentimental certainty it always brings. The contractor could deny a lot. He could not deny math and bone. If you're waiting for a twist, this isn't that story. Twists are for tales that refuse to admit a straight line existed the whole time. The line here is simple. Access made opportunity. Money made motive. Keys made permission. A file made memory. A DVR made movement. A drain made remains. A property made proof. When confronted with the map, the district breathed out the words you use when you need oxygen more than explanation. Process failures, miscommunication, policy remediation, personnel transitions. The assistant principal resigned. The facilities director title went vacant and then filled by someone who believed in audits. The board spoke of healing, a word best applied to bodies that have first been acknowledged as wounded. One board member asked in a meeting no one filmed why the camera upgrade had ever removed a lens. The vendor said they followed a spec. The spec came from the district. The district said the assistant principal drafted it after a coverage review. The assistant principal said he signed where he was told to. The circle did what circles do. Looked like a shape from far away and like an escape route up close. The family needed a quiet room and a door that closed. They had waited 14 years. They were owed that. They were asked to approve a statement. They said no. They chose something smaller and stronger instead. A sentence that could fit on a card. We waited. We found you. We remember. The students returned to 214 again, grown now with taxes and appointments and a need to stand in the doorway of a place that had made them brave. Brave enough to go downstairs when a librarian said, "Try the room where we put what we don't want to look at." You don't get hero music for pulling a pegboard. You get a file. That's better. Music ends. Files stay. The maintenance corridor is still there. The camera is back. The badge reader blinks with the dumb faith of machines. Green for go, red for no. The keybox has a new glass and a new rule. 2 signatures for masters, electronic plus physical reconciliation every Friday before close of business. The work orders posts at 4 p.m. whether anyone plans to be there late or not. If no one does, the post says no one. Open space where secrets used to sit matters more than plaques. None of this brings a teacher back. All of it admits a building can learn. We close the section where we began it, the landing. The recovered DVR is back in a bag in a climate-controlled shelf. The frames have been exported, admitted, argued over, and accepted. The landing doesn't need the fight anymore. It needs a story that doesn't leave it out. At 9:36 p.m., a teacher descended to ask for what she'd asked for in email, verification. At 9:36 p.m., a contractor waited to explain why verification was inconvenient. At 9:36 p.m., a building had 2 choices: watch or pretend watching wouldn't have mattered. It chose wrong once. It won't get to choose again. This matters, keep watching. If you work in a place with keys, cameras, or contracts, share this with the person who signs. Paper kept Hannah's voice alive for 14 years. It can keep someone else safe tomorrow. Like the video so the platforms don't bury it. Subscribe to Behind the Crime for weekly truth-first investigations. And if you know a story hiding behind a pegboard, send it. Here's the part that won't leave me, and I hope it won't leave you. Hannah's words weren't pleas. They were instructions. Reposition camera. Audit keys. Post orders. She built, in forms and emails, the very path investigators used 14 years later to find what rumor never could. She left a map, not of where she went, but of why she vanished. And when her students walked into the basement, They didn't discover a smoking gun. They discovered the box of matches the arsonist thought no one would check. What could have saved her? Maybe nothing. Maybe a single camera that never went blind. Maybe a single administrator who said, if she wants light, give her light. Maybe a contractor who remembered he was hired to fix doors, not create new ones for secrets to walk through. Maybe a culture where emergency night work doesn't skate past auditors' eyes like a kid at last bell. What will save the next Hannah is not a documentary. It's you, who runs keys, who approves invoices, who asks why an upgrade means less coverage in the place even a student noticed was dark. We're not done. We've opened the file. We've recovered the video. We've listened to the drain. Next, we'll walk the maintenance corridor step by step with the exact timing of the motion pings. We'll sit down with the retired custodian who explains the orders he got and the nights that didn't feel like nights. We'll show how shell companies dress in respectable names and how a storage unit rent receipt writes a confession with numbers. We'll trace one signature across 5 years of emergency work, and we'll ask why keycards beeped on nights no one was in the building, except the building always knows. If you've ever worked in a place with after-hours access, with remit addresses that point to corrugated doors, with keys that wander farther than sheets say they should stay. Not because this story is grim, but because it is useful. Hannah's file didn't travel 14 years to be a horror story. It came back to teach.